Well, tonight we take a look at reaction to the president's first address to Congress. Who liked it, who wasn't too crazy about it, and what the fact chairs are saying about it. Then, the investigations into whether the Trump campaign made contact with the Russians are ongoing. Top Republican says we need a special prosecutor, but just about every other Republican says not so fast. Our legal panel joins us to weigh in. Then, President Obama's Justice Department launched several high-profile probes of police departments, but the new Attorney General, he wants to scale that back, especially the civil rights cases. The question is, how will that impact policing? Good evening, everybody, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. And we begin this evening with President Trump's first speech to Congress. Now, we know the president loves to talk about ratings, but maybe not these ratings. Last night's speech, it drew about 43 million viewers across the major networks and cable channels. Give you a frame of reference, President Obama's first address got more than 53 million. But all that said, most people said he did some good for himself talking about President Trump. Overall, people liked it. 76%, according to those polled, say they approved of it. 82% called it presidential, and 70% said it made them feel optimistic about the country. Chuck Schumer, though, not one of those. Here's what the New York senior senator and minority leader had to say about the address.
Here's the basic problem, George. His speeches are always totally detached from reality. He talks to the working folks of America. They were his main constituency. But the way he's governed has been totally with the hard right special interests against the working people.
And the fact checkers, they also had a field day taking issue with a number of things. NBC News pointed out a few of them. The president said that 94 million people are out of the labor force. NBC said that is incredibly misleading. His claim that the Keystone and Dakota Access pipelines would create tens of thousands of jobs also considered misleading. Because the president didn't mention those are all temporary construction jobs is the issue. Also, President's claim that the Yemen raid that killed a Navy SEAL yielded vital intelligence was deemed a disputed fact, and his claim that the majority of terrorists are foreign-born is flat out false. Well, our senior political correspondent Andrew Whitman, he was on the ground in Washington. He got reaction from lawmakers after the address. Andrew?
And Rich, the reaction was not particularly surprising. In fact, maybe a little bit predictable. Go back in time 1 year, and any lawmaker who was praising President Obama's State of the Union address last night was critical of President Trump and the other way around. But each lawmaker had their own reasons for reacting the way they did. Congressman Engel, first of all, your reaction to the president's address to a joint session tonight.
Well, I think there were a lot of platitudes, not much substance in terms of how he's going to accomplish things. But, you know, he did essentially read from the script, and he was less combative than I anticipated. So if this is a start to reach out to Democrats to work together, I'll certainly take it and accept it. But the proof is in the pudding. We got to hear where he's getting his money from, because that's going to determine whether or not he can get his programs done.
Your reaction to the president's address tonight?
Well, I think it was optimistic and it was ambitious. He laid out an agenda for rebuilding America, and I think a lot of people will find a lot of favor with that.
I thought it was a fine speech, and it laid out broad goals for the nation, and I think that he wanted to inspire the American people, and he talked about bipartisan cooperation, and I hope that that is possible.
I thought that the calls for unity and immigration reform and other platitudes were welcome, but they have to be more than just vacuous and vague promises, and that's what was so deficient about the speech tonight. The campaign rhetoric has to be matched by real action, real plans, a real commitment to national defense, economic progress, job creation, and, of course, improving the Affordable Care Act, not replacing it and destroying it.
All right, along with Andrew, joined by Dominic Carter, of course, political journalist and author. And Dom, I kind of had a sense on how the night was going to go when I was walking in the newsroom before we came on to introduce the president. And President Trump was sitting and he was going through his speech. And the reaction from people is, look, and even from the commentator that was listening, look at that. He's previewing what he's going to say tonight. And I said to myself, oh my God, if you wanted to set the bar low, the fact that you're reading what you're about to do to the nation here, let alone even beyond our borders, that you're actually reading the speech before you deliver it. But after the 40 days we've had, and some of the midnight tweets and the off-message comments and everything else, he didn't have a high bar to clear yesterday. He delivered.
Not a high bar.
Wow.
Not a high bar. Facts aside, it was a very good night for the president.
Yep.
I watched in the first minute, and I have to be honest with you guys. I felt like I was watching one of those Eddie Murphy movies when he pretends like he's a politician, because I couldn't believe, I'm just speaking as a person now, that before a joint session of Congress and I was looking at Donald Trump speaking at the podium.
It was surreal. I know exactly what you're saying. And when Paul Ryan called everyone to order and he said the President of the United States, Donald Trump, I felt that way at the inauguration too. This is real. But to me, I'm with you, Dom. Beyond the optics to the substance of it, during the day when you were on the ground in Washington, there was word that the president had given messaging that he's looking for a compromise bill on immigration reform here. He also talked about tax credits, which he'd never mentioned before, as it relates to whatever would be in the replacement and repeal of Obamacare.
I think there was talk of a path to citizenship, too, that briefly came out. And you asked me about that.
That went away, though.
Yeah, you asked me about that as we were getting ready, or just after we were either, at 6 o'clock or... And it was honestly the first I had heard of it all day, because I'd been talking with lawmakers who hadn't heard of it either. And I think that was my first indication, looking back, that was something of a false flag coming from the White House. And as it turns out, that's exactly what it was.
But clearly, there is, to my memory, never been such a pronounced quadrant of audiences. Forget about the American public, which is critically important to this as well. But you have on the Democratic side an emboldened not only left, but others who say, this guy's a threat to democracy. I only can help myself the more that I oppose anything that comes out of this administration's mouth here. Then you have the other Democrats who say, I'm up for re-election in a district that can go either way. I gotta figure out where I can give, but at the same end, not look like I'm capitulating. Then you go across the aisle where I think the differences are going to be even more pronounced and more problematic for the president and his own party, where you've got the populists who are kind of with him. They're not exactly sure if he's a Republican or not, but they like the idea that he's blowing stuff up. And then you've got the conservatives who say, hold on a second. We're cutting taxes. He's building this wall. Mexico ain't paying for it. We're going to do $1 trillion. That was with a T, right, for infrastructure? Oh, yeah. And we're also going to spend more money on defense. We're not going to touch Social Security or Medicare. How exactly are we going to pay for all this? I was most fascinated by the conservatives. And when they hear all this, are they wondering, am I listening to a Democrat or am I listening to a Republican?
I think I think they know they're listening to a Republican, and they also know that the budget writing process begins and ends on Capitol Hill.
And he punted it to him last night. He made it clear because it's on you guys.
Yeah, so Donald Trump can lay out whatever plan he wants. I think the conservatives, especially the fiscal conservatives, are saying, yeah, that's nice. We're going to craft the legislation that we want, and we're going to be the ones who dominate this process. It's funny, you were talking about the breakdown. I think there's really three parties right now. There's the liberal Democratic left, who are just anti-Trump no matter what. There's the Republican right, which is pro-Trump. And within about 5 points, if you're in a district that was 5 points either way, +5 for Trump or +5 for Hillary, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, you're in that same boat, which means you're going to be a little bit deferential to the president, you're going to be a little bit deferential to the people who are protesting, because you need to see which way the wind blows. And that's really Trump's popularity numbers, and how the nation feels about Trump will determine what that group in the middle does from either party.
Now, you mentioned, Dominic, it was a good night for the president. The polls bear that out. But do you have any confidence? We've said this before. I remember, right, that we saw on on election night. He came across as presidential. He didn't take shots. He seemed like the new man here, okay? And then even on the inauguration, there was times where, he sounded like a president. A little dark, but okay. In every one of those instances, within 24 hours, even during the campaign, he would do something that would, a midnight tweet or something else, and say, oh, wait a minute, that was just, that was just an act he was putting on us. Can he keep up the presidential thing? Will he feed off of the fact that he's gotten good press for the first time in more than a month today and try and keep it up or not?
Well, Richard, let's be very
Can
clear.
he? Does he have that in his Constitution?
Let's be very clear. The whole thing is an act. The speech last night. He might be able to pull it off. Here's what I'm concerned about for Democrats. Because they look like to me, like they were whining last night. Schumer, Pelosi, oh, it's just a speech, no substance. But you're right. But the White House noticed for the first time since he's been in office, they didn't step on their own message. Today, they didn't ruin. They finally realized the president had a good day, and they said, we're going to pull back and we're going to enjoy this. And Richard, to think that he would spend the first 30 seconds talking about blacks and the horrible attacks on Jewish synagogues, it sent finally, the right message from the president.
And it was like huge kudos for that. There was another moment last night, and it's interesting who you talk to. For the people who don't follow it like us, with that Yemen raid and that Navy SEAL that lost his life, it was a moment that for 2 minutes there was an acknowledgement of the widow in the audience, the standing ovation, and the president kept coming back to it. Absent all of that was the father of that late soldier, who took huge issue with the president, didn't want to meet with the president when his son's body came back to Dover Air Force Base. And he also wants an investigation into a mission that he said came within the first 6 days of the administration, was ill-thought and ill-planned. And there's debate as to whether or not the intelligence that was gathered in that raid was a quote-unquote success. And let's not forget what the press secretary told us. He basically said any person who questioned the mission was unpatriotic. That got swept away. I felt it was a moving moment, but it also felt a little cheap to me.
Two observations about that. And before I get, and there's been a lot of reporting about how effective that raid was in terms of yielding intelligence. NBC's been doing a lot of work, and so that story is still going. Before I get to the 2 points, this is in no way designed to impugn that widow who was showing genuine emotion last night. My heart went out to her, and she deserves every bit of praise and attention that she's been getting, and the focus should be on her. She has given the ultimate sacrifice for this country. First of all, I hope for her sake President Trump was telling the truth last night. Because of that reporting that there's not been a lot of credible intelligence to come from the raid, and we know that the president's aides have a tendency to tell him what he wants to hear. So if Mattis told Trump, hey, we got lots of good stuff out of this, just to make him feel better, if it comes out later that there wasn't a lot of actual actionable intelligence that came from this, and that he was just using her as a prop, I mean, how heartbreaking is that for her, and how despicable would that be for the president? And if you ask me, that's where it's going to wind up going, because that's where the reporting has come. The second part is, yeah, it was a 2-minute applause break, and this is a little ticky-tack, but it's a 2-minute applause break because President Trump was applauding the entire time, and nobody in that room was going to stop clapping while he was clapping. And the way we know this is because as soon as he was done, he looked at her and said, I think that set a record, which it did. But that was his intent from the very beginning, to keep that applause break going that long. I found that just a little bit tacky. But boy, oh boy, if it turns out that he was just telling us what we want, what he wants us to hear.
Some people say, oh, you're always, I hope that we're wrong on this one, because NBC's reporting, as you're right, is you hate to use people as optics. It's happened before in State of the Unions. We've all seen it. But in this particular case, and how prolonged it was, and then especially when there's division in the family with the father who's irate about all of this. Anyway, let's hope it's not. It was a good night for the president. We'll see how he builds on it. The jury's out right now. The math is in question, and the politics even more so. But as they say, stay tuned. Guys, thank you all very much. All right, coming up next, we will stay with the administration, more specifically the investigation of it. Did the Trump campaign make contact with the Russians? It is that $64,000 question. Instead of partisan probes, many people say you need an independent prosecutor. That includes one top Republican.